Hello and welcome back to Web Design for Beginners. In this video, we're going to be learning how to add images to our web page or web pages. And before we dive into that, let's just take a quick step back and look at the HTML building blocks. Now, we said earlier that the building blocks constitutes of tags, attributes, and elements. We've been looking at tags, the p tag, the heading tags, the list tags, and so many other tags. But let's look at what attributes and what elements are. That will give us a better understanding when we start adding images into our web page. So the first thing we're looking at here is attributes. So attributes are just special words that provide additional information about tags or elements. Now the way we do that is that each attribute comes with a name and a value. For example, if this is an attribute, you first of all write the name, and then you have an equal sign, and then in double quotes, you're going to have the value inside. So for example, we might have an attribute called color, and then the value of the color is going to be red or green or blue. You get the point. Or if an attribute is called or referred to as height, the value of height could be 50 cm, 30 cm, 1 cm, whatever the case might be. So how do we then now write attributes? Now attributes are written or applied in the open tags. So what that means, for example, I have a h3 tag here that has the opening, it has some content, and then it has the closing tag. Now inside the open tag, you can see I left a very huge space. So this is where we usually write our attributes. You'd notice that in the opening tag, we still have one of the the angle brackets at the end here. So there's a big space, and then we just write our attributes like so. So we write them in the open tags. It's fine if you don't understand. When we start to write the code or write the tags, you get more understanding. Another thing I want you to note is that we can add multiple attributes. So we can have more than one attribute, and we'll do that by simply giving a space between the attributes. So I have the same example here. This is a h3, and remember we write our attributes in the open tag. So I left a very big space here just to show you. And then you can have multiple attributes. We have attribute 1, and we have the value. We also have attribute 2 and the value of the attribute. We can keep adding more attributes as much as we want. So let's then look at what elements are. So elements are what makes up every HTML file. Now you might not know it, but you have been creating elements. So elements are just simply a collection of the tags, the attributes, and the contents. For example, this is an element where you have your tag, your attribute, and then you have your content. As simple as that. You do not need to bother about this. You don't need to cram or put this in memory. So far as you're designing your web page, you're already using elements because you're putting tags, you're going to put in attributes, and you're going to type in contents in between those tags. So automatically you've been creating elements, or you would create elements. So then let's look at how do we add images. The tag we use to add image is called image tag, and this is how you write it, img. You don't write the image in full, you just say img. So this stands for image. So we just simply use this to add images. But in actual fact, images are not really added to our web page. Rather, they are linked to the web page. You're going to be seeing an example of this, and then you get more understanding. But just bear with me for a moment. Now, image tag requires some attributes. Now, the first one that it requires is an attribute called src, and it stands for source. So that is simply telling the image tag where the image is. Remember, we said that the images are kind of like linked to the web page. So using the source attribute, we're kind of telling the browser where that image is. So it can make a reference to it, it can make a link to it. That's simply what the source does. We're going to see that very soon with an example. Another tag that is also important is the alt tag. Now, for some reason, if your image is not displayed, maybe it got deleted, or it got moved around and it's no more there, and then the browser goes to look for it and it couldn't find it, we usually add an alt, like a text, that we use in place of that image. Okay, and this is kind of like a good practice for SEO. If you want your website to be friends with Google, you need to put an alt attribute for every image you add. There are so many other attributes that you can add to your image tag, but these top two are the very important ones. Another one I just want to show you is the width attribute. As the name implies, is used to specify the width used to display the image. Although, according to recent standards, it's advised not to use the width attribute. You should apply the width in some other way, but we're going to be covering all the ways you can do that. We're going to start with the width attribute and then walk to other ways you can change the width of your image. And then another attribute we're going to look at is the height attribute, and as the name implies, it's used to specify the height of the image. So then let's dive into an example and hopefully all this will become clear. So I'm back on our HTML page, our web page. Remember, we stay writing about our favorite food, which is fine. We just use tags and some content. Now we haven't used any attributes on our own, although there are some attributes at the head section, but we haven't added any attributes. And then we also want to add images. So I want us to add an images just before where we have my favorite food. So there'll be an image here, and I'm going to go with the image of rice and stew because that's what I'm talking about. So how do we do that then? So I'll find where I want to add the image. So the image is going to come before the H1. So I'll place my cursor before the H1 and hit enter to create a space at the top. And then I'll go to that space I created, which is on line number 12. Your own could be different. You could have a different number. It could be a 10, 13, or 20, but mine is on line number 12. So on this line is where I want to add my image. So I'll simply add the image tag. I'll say img and I'll hit tab. Now automatically VS Code kind of like knows that you need these two attributes. So therefore it's actually added them, but I'm going to delete all of this and type in manually. So I'll say angle bracket img and then angle bracket again. Now one special thing about the image tag that I forgot to mention earlier is that it doesn't need a closing tag. It's kind of a self-closing tag, like it closes itself. So you don't have to have an extra img tag. This is wrong. Okay, it's one of those special tags. So we don't need this close tag. We only need the open tag. Okay, because it's a self-closing tag. Now, how do we write our attributes? Remember we said it's inside the open tag. So I'll go inside the open tag, make sure that my cursor is just after G and before the angle bracket. I'll give a space. Very important. Make sure you give a space so that you can differentiate from the tag itself and the attribute you're typing. So the first attribute we mentioned that we need is the src. Src simply means source. So src, then I need to put the value. So I'll say equal to, and then I'll put quotes. Now inside this quote is where I'll refer to where the image is. So we now need to define where this image is, and let's just do that. Now I'm going to go to the folder that I created on my desktop. I'm sure you also did the same. The folder that contains my home.html file. So I'm going to go to the desktop and have the folder here. Just open that up. Now I have just my home file here. Now what I want to do is just to make things organized. I want to create a folder called images and then have all my images inside that folder. You can decide not to create the folder, it is fine, but just to make things organized, I would like to have a folder where all my images I need for this particular website is going to be inside. So I'll right click, I'll go to new, and I'll say folder, and I'll name the folder images. So I have a folder called images. When I double click to open the folder, there is nothing inside. So in here, I want to bring in the images I'll be using. So you can go online, you can download the images. You can download some images online of food that you want to add. I've already done so, and the images are actually on my desktop. So let me minimize this. I have 3 images on my desktop, which I have downloaded. So what I want to do is I want to move these images to that images folder I created so that it's easier to link. Remember, the image tag actually links to the image itself. So let us copy these 3 images. So I just select all of it. I'll just Ctrl C to copy on Windows or Command C on Mac. So I'll go to intro, go to images, and then I want to paste my images. So I'll paste those images. So I have my first, second, and third image. And there's something very important you should do. Number 1 is that you should rename your files. If the names are long or they're hard to remember, you should rename that file. And when you're renaming the file, make sure there is no space in between. So I have this very first image that has a space. It actually says rice stew, but it has a space in between. So I'll right click on it and I'll say rename. I'll just say rice stew without the space. Okay, so every other name here doesn't have any space. You could go through your images, make sure that you rename them so they have no spaces. So they have no spaces. Now when you're done renaming them, there's a second thing you need to check. You need to check what extension the image has. Now you're wondering, what are extensions? Now I'll show you. So right click on any of the images and click on properties. Now you're going to see something that says type of file, and it actually says a PNG file. Now every file in your PC has an extension. An extension is simply a way a computer understands what kind of file that is. For example, if this was an audio file, it will have an extension of maybe MP3, AAC, and so many other extensions that has to do with audio. That way your computer or your device is going to know that, hey, this is an audio file. So therefore I'll treat it as an audio file. I'll use maybe my video player to play the audio file. Now, if it's an image file, you see extensions like .jpg, .png, .gif, and so many others. So make sure you take note of the type of image file you have. For me, I have .png, and let's close this. And the other ones are also .png because I have checked previously. I have .png for the second one, properties.png for the third one. Fine. I can close this and I'll head back to my VS Code. It's time to actually link that image. Now let's go back to our source. Remember, this is us linking the image. And the image is inside the folder called images. So I'll type images. Now I'm typing inside the quotes, inside the double quotes. Say images. And I'll put a /. And thanks to VS Code, it will kind of like bring out the contents of that images folder. So I can just select anyone. Let me select the first one. And you can see how it is written, images /rise.png. You can see the extension. So this is how the image tag is done. We have the tag, we have this attribute of source, and we have the value inside double quotes. Don't forget there's an equal sign. Cool. Now remember we said we can add multiple attributes. So the second attribute we want to add is the alt attribute. And the way we can do that is by giving a space. So at the end of my source attribute, just after the end of the double quotes, remember I'm still inside the opening tag of the image. I'll hit a space. Carefully look at where my cursor is. Then I'll type the other attribute I want to add, which is alt, alt, equal to, and double quotes. So here I can say rice, just type a text, rice and stew image, so that for some reason, if this image is not visible, we're going to see rice and stew. Now, if you look at my browser or my web page, you can see I have that beautiful image right at the top before you have my favorite food. So I want you to try this. Make sure you take note of how it is written. You can come back and check. You can pause the video and check everything that I've done, or go back and see how I copied and renamed the images. But make sure that your images are inside a folder called images, and that images folder is inside that your first folder you created for your website. So when you've done that, let us add more attributes just to play around with the size of this image. Let's say I want to make it look smaller. I'm going to add a width or a height attribute. And I can do that by adding another attribute to this image tag. And remember, it's a multiple attribute. So I'll go to the end, just before the angle brackets, I'll give a space, and I'll say width equal to, and my quotation, double quotes. And then in there, I'll just specify a number. So I can say 300. I'll save. You can see the image got smaller. Now, if 300 is not what you want, you can play around with the size to get the appropriate size you want. You can also decide to add on the height attribute, but I'm going to leave that one for you to decide. So if you want to add height attribute, remember, you go to the end just before the angle bracket, give a space, and add the height attribute. Now I'm going to add multiple images. So let's see, let me add an image before ingredients. So let's look for where ingredients, where we have that here in our code. Okay, so I have that on line number 19 for mine. So just put my cursor in front of line number 19, everything that's in line number 19, and hit enter just to give it space. Now I'll go to that top, the space I created. I'll add an image tag, img, and then let me add the source. Let me close this first, and let's add the source, src equal to double quotes, and then I'll type images because it's inside images /, and let me choose the second image. I can just click on it. Cool. I can save, and that's gonna appear. So I already have 2 images. Don't forget to add your alt. So I just move my cursor a bit out, and I'll say alt equal to, let me say rice, and let me say rice, stew, and chicken. I'll save. Okay, so let me now take this moment to show you how this alt attribute works. So here this image is visible, but I'm going to intentionally make a mistake so that this image is not visible, so that this alt attribute can kick in. So I'll go to my source attribute, and I'll just misspell this image. So I'll just add any random letter just so that it's misspelled, because actually an image named rice, stewy, whatever I spelled, is not in that folder, so it's not going to be found. So when I save, that image is actually going to disappear because the link is not correct. The source, there's no image that contains or that has a name. So then you can see the alt attribute kicks in here. You can see the rice, stew, and chicken that I typed as the alt kicks in. But if the image is found, so let's just undo what we did and save, the alt disappears and the image is shown instead. Cool. So you can go ahead and add more images to your web page. Remember, download the image, rename the image so it doesn't have a space or some funny characters like numbers or things that I had to remember. Copy the images into a folder you've created called images, although you can call it anything. Just copy it to that folder so that it's easy to find, and make sure that folder is inside the original folder of your website, so it's easy to link. And then you can easily just add your images using the image tag, and not forgetting to put the source attribute and the alt attribute. So I want you to try that. You might make some mistakes. Don't worry. Just take your time. Make sure that everything is correctly spelled. If your image is not showing up, make sure your source attribute is correctly spelled. Make sure you have the equal sign. Make sure you have your double quotes. And make sure that you spelled everything. Even the name of your folder is spelled correctly. Any mistake, the image is not going to show up. So take your time and add your images. So I'll see you guys in the next video.